Why did Johnny Carson spend his last few years of life totally alone? He was America's king of late night, with millions in this country looking up to him. In 1992, almost 50 million people watched his last show. However, after that night, he disappeared totally. No interviews, no comebacks, and hardly any public life whatsoever. So, why did one of the most famous men on television retreat into isolation? That's the mystery we're about to reveal. When Johnny passed away on January 23, 2005, there was no public memorial service held. From the 1980s until his death in 2005, he stayed at his Malibu home, seeing fewer than 20 people each year outside of his immediate family. You would wonder how that was even possible to someone who had been hosting NBC's The Tonight Show between 1962 and 1992, 30 consecutive years in the spotlight. How was he able to restrict his interactions with people, particularly at a time when he had interviewed more than 7,000 visitors and wrapped up about 4,531 episodes? It's no wonder Johnny Carson became the most familiar face on television at that time. He was frequently referred to as effortlessly funny and charming, but few people knew that wasn't really the real Johnny. Or was it? His producer, Peter Lazzoli, picked up on something disturbing. He saw that Johnny wore a mask, an image of a lively, outgoing man, but once the cameras turned off, he became quiet and detached, speaking in dull tones and longing for the comfort of his couch at home. To Johnny, being a TV host wasn't a passion. It was simply his job. And there was a reason behind this, which we'll soon explain. Whenever shooting would come to an end, Johnny was already looking for ways to stay away from people and hide out at the studio. Small conversation was something he couldn't stand altogether. He didn't even like talking to crew or coworkers. Johnny liked to be alone, working on crossword puzzles instead of talking. And as for fans, that was even less likely. He was so determined not to be around people that he requested NBC have a special private exit built for him. He would exit the same way every night, adhering to his rigid schedule. There were moments when his routine was interrupted, such as when he'd be invited to Hollywood or to industry functions. Johnny handled those invitations like weights. He avoided them whenever he could, and if he had to go, he went begrudgingly. On a typical year, he'd go to a dozen affairs, while his rival Merv Griffin went to 45 or so. Johnny always found an excuse. Parties were for extroverts, he said, and he'd rather stay home and chat with the dog than his wife. What a guy. Could this be the reason for his 4 marriages? Was he emotionally starved from the women he married, both before and after he went off the public radar? His life was uncomplicated, playing tennis alone or reading astronomy magazine alone. Afternoons were spent making brief phone calls to Jay Leno for exchanging jokes. Their interactions were always short and professionally formal. Even when visitors such as director Howard Smith dropped by, they would talk for a little while before Johnny would tell them to sit quietly and stargaze. Smith said Johnny appeared peaceful, but was it real peace, or were demons from his past still following him even at the end of his life? Every night, Johnny had dinner at home. His 4th wife, Alexis Mass, spoke of their dinners being always quiet. No visitors, aside from relatives. She claimed that Johnny lived for silence. But was it selfishness or peace? Rather than talk with his wife, Johnny preferred reading, playing tennis alone, or staring at the ocean. He appeared more interested in himself than in others around him. But Johnny was a giver too. Privately and without any fanfare, he issued millions of dollars worth of checks to strangers and charitable organizations. But how could the same man who could be so generous with others pay so little attention to his wife? It wasn't just his marriages that were affected. He treated most relationships the same way. It's not difficult to understand how Johnny turned out that way when you consider his upbringing. As a child, he was different from the other children. While kids in the neighborhood played baseball or ran through Iowa cornfields, Johnny remained indoors, reading comic books or practicing card tricks from a mail-order magic kit his parents reluctantly purchased after he pleaded for it. At the age of 14, he was already anxious in social settings to the point where he would hide behind the upright family piano when visitors came over. At times, he would sit in the shadows, dealing cards just so he could stay below the radar. He did this because he was afraid that should he attract too much attention or mess up, he'd be in trouble. His mother, Ruth, expected perfection from all of her children, but she didn't believe Johnny would ever measure up to her standards. To be a kid forced to feel you could never be good enough is awful. She even grouched that he was dirty and messy all the time, and she detested dirt. Ruth was merciless, a closer match in temperament to a cold naval captain than to a mother. Affection at her home was infrequent, and when it was present, it needed to be earned. Even after Johnny became a late-night celebrity, there were accounts that she continued to tease him. Perhaps those accounts were true? Perhaps she could have hated her very own son? When Johnny initially received his deck of cards, he practiced tricks on his family using them, simply leading them around, having them pick a card. He even chose to perform before an audience despite being shy, and his mother, much to his surprise, helped him out by fashioning a cape for his initial performance at a local Kiwanis club. Performing as the Great Carsoni, Johnny opened at age 14, receiving $3 a performance. It altered him. For the first time, the affection of the crowd substituted the chill. Johnny didn't grieve when Ruth passed away in October 1985 at the age of 84. According to friends, he said, "The wicked which is dead," and did not go to her funeral. But then, afterward, he learned something that stunned him. In her house, he uncovered a huge box packed with newspaper clippings of his whole career, each article, review, and mention. The same woman who never complimented him had secretly been his greatest supporter the whole time. Johnny brought that box home and stored it in his bedroom closet the rest of his life. Did he ever regret missing her funeral? Might he have forgiven her if only he had known earlier? Being raised in such a cold, demanding climate harmed Johnny's perception of human contact. He would rather not actively seek people out than risk being awkward or criticized. But secretly, he ached for love. He enjoyed the attention he received when performing magic tricks, and soon determined that he wanted to be a magician. Some accounts say his mother cruelly discouraged him, but in light of the clippings she collected in a box, maybe she eventually came to her senses. During his time in the U.S. Navy, Johnny learned more about himself. He was tough, competitive, and even boxed in amateur bouts, winning 15 of 16 bouts. When U.S. Secretary of the Navy James V. Forrestal offered him an opportunity to remain in the Navy, Johnny replied no. He wanted to become a magician. Forrestal was taken aback and invited him to show him a trick, and Johnny dazzled him totally. That experience taught Johnny that if he could amuse someone as severe and elegant as Forrestal, he could entertain anyone. Shortly afterward, he altered course again. He did not want to be a magician, but a comedy writer. In 1946, he attended the University of Nebraska and studied journalism, hoping writing gags would allow him to amuse people without having to have anything to do with them personally. But eventually, he transferred his study to speech and drama. He didn't even want to write comedy anymore. He wanted to do it, preferably on the radio. Johnny was doing magic shows for $25 a pop and loving it and the freedom of being on stage at the same time. In 1949, he graduated from college. Although he didn't start out as a radio performer right away, his college studies served him well for his future real career, television. And after years of attempts and disappointments, Johnny finally landed his big job in 1962, hosting The Tonight Show on NBC. Why would a man so introverted and shy ever want to host a live television show? Because that is where he ultimately found love, not from family or friends, but from the audience. The laughter and applause provided him with the warmth he never got growing up. But unhappily, he couldn't extend that same love to his wives or his 3 sons. Just like his mom, Johnny dealt with them in a cold, indifferent manner. He had turned into what he despised the most. Still, part of Johnny's retreat from fame came from his family and his need for control. Hosting The Tonight Show gave him the illusion of closeness. It was his version of therapy, a way to cope with the emotional damage of his past.